It was the afternoon of September 8th, 1992, in Port Hueneme, California, when a motorist driving down the road noticed a young woman dancing on the center divider. Worried, the man pulled over to help. He tried to talk to her, asking her if she was okay, but she didn't respond. Not a word. Not knowing what else to do, and fearing for her safety, he brought her to the nearby Ventura County Police Station, hoping they could help figure out how to help her. But when police tried to talk to her, they hit the same wall. She didn't seem to be able to speak, didn't seem to know sign language, and wasn't understanding what they were saying to her. The only thing she had on her person was a bank receipt from San Diego, 200 miles away. That was it. The police ultimately had no reason to hold her, so she was let go. The very next day, another police officer saw the woman again, wandering, confused, on a busy street. This time she was taken to a women's shelter where the staff tried to connect with her. But again, she wasn't able to communicate. The shelter was able to bring in a specialist in communication to see if he could break through to her. With the shelter supervisor, they started simple. They wrote down their names and pointed to themselves, then they handed the pen to her. She paused before slowly forming letters with her fingers. When she was finished, the letters spelled Luxi. When she was shown the name, her face was said to light up, like that name meant something to her. Some believed the name might have Basque roots, a version of Lucy, with the X pronounced like a CH sound. That could point to Spain or even South America, but no one really knew. Regardless, from that point on, they started calling her Lucy, and through basic signs and gestures, they continued to learn more about her. They found out that Lucy was 23 years old, and she said she had taken a plane to California, had a child, and that the child had been taken away from her. After that, she said, she'd been left behind. There were a few other clues. For example, Lucy didn't know how to cook, but she always knew when it was time to eat. She could brush her hair and clean herself, so she clearly knew how to take care of herself. But not long after arriving at the shelter, Lucy left, disappearing again. She turned up again a year later in December 1993 in Cotati, California, and again she was brought to authorities. This time, however, doctors were able to determine Lucy had the mental age of a 9-year-old. But soon after, she vanished again. Over the years, she would resurface from time to time, but never staying in one place for long. The last confirmed sighting came in May 2014 in Santa Paula, California. No missing person report ever matched. No family came forward. The name Lucy never led anywhere. She remains a complete mystery, a woman with no past, lost somewhere in the cracks of the system. From the start, life seemed just a little harder for Gordon Thomas Page Jr. than it was for other kids. He was a big kid, at least for his age, slow, awkward, and clumsy. School subjects like basic math for Gordon was a struggle. But behind all that was something extraordinary. Gordon had a mind like a steel trap, at least when it came to baseball. He memorized batting averages like most people know the days of the week. Gordon rattled off stats, player names, and positions of every team, flawlessly memorized from the baseball card collection he always kept close. By June of 1981, he graduated high school and got a job at a local grocery store. And though he worked hard, he struggled with customers. Conversations didn't come easy to Gordon, and eventually, they let him go because of it. His parents, Gordon Sr. and Linda, were growing more concerned for their son's future. They met with social workers. Doctors ran tests. The diagnosis was ultimately schizophrenia. It was recommended that Gordon move into a group home where he'd be supervised and medicated. The drugs they gave him, powerful antipsychotics, caused serious side effects. And not just psychological, but physical too. They left Gordon confused, dull, and unsteady. In September of 1989, his family moved to Florida, and Gordon stayed behind in Michigan. He'd been accepted into a group home in Grand Rapids earlier that year and wanted to stay put. Then, on November 29, 1989, things began to change. That morning, a workman parked his truck in the group home driveway. Keys in the ignition, engine running. Gordon, despite being heavily medicated, got in and drove away. He didn't make it far. Right down the road, he crashed the truck. But he didn't stick around. Instead, he got out and kept walking. A few hours later, someone found him at a local elementary school. He had wandered into a classroom and was trying to teach the class. After the incident, Gordon was placed in a county hospital for evaluation. That's where he met a psychiatric social worker who offered a new perspective. Gordon, he said, wasn't schizophrenic. He was highly functioning autistic. With this new understanding, Gordon's parents found a different home for him, also in Grand Rapids, Michigan, that specialized in autism care. It seemed like the right place, maybe the first one that truly fit. But there was a condition. No visits for the first 2 months. They wanted Gordon to settle in without outside influence. It wasn't easy, but his parents agreed. And so, on May 22nd, 1991, Gordon Sr. and Linda said goodbye. As his father turned to leave, Gordon Jr. made one last attempt, rushing to the van, trying to open the locked door. He wanted to go home with his parents, but the door stayed shut. 6 days later, in the early hours of May 27th, 1991, a staff member making rounds discovered something chilling. Gordon was gone. He'd escaped through a window. No one had seen him leave. No one knew where he'd gone. An hour later, a fireman reported seeing a man matching Gordon's description hitchhiking along Interstate 96. A full-scale search followed, but turned up nothing. Then, 6 weeks later, a strange clue was found. Under an overpass near the ramps for both Chicago and Detroit, someone found a small collection of baseball cards. They were Gordon's. 3 of them, his favorites, had been carefully separated from the rest. To his family, it was more than just a clue. It was a message. Proof he had been there. A breadcrumb left behind. They believe he's still out there, alive. Possibly in a hospital somewhere, unknown, unrecognized. A John Doe. But investigators aren't so sure. Many believe Gordon passed away not long after he disappeared. More than 3 decades later, his family is still holding out hope that one day, Gordon Page Jr. will find his way home. On August 10, 1993, deep in the Redwood Forest, just east of Mendocino, California, a strange scene sat quietly beneath the trees. A red Toyota Tercel was stuck in the mud near a shallow creek. A car jack was left by the front tire. The radio had been torn from the dashboard. In the back seat were neatly folded wet clothes, a bra, panties, a wallet, and a driver's license. There were smears of blood on the front seat, shredded identification papers, and torn-up photographs scattered nearby. The ID led investigators to Christy Krebs. Christy was a 22-year-old aspiring chef with 2 restaurant jobs in Fort Bragg, just 7 miles from where her car was found. She lived with her parents and 2 younger brothers, and they were a tight-knit family. Unfortunately for them, this scene felt all too familiar. A few years earlier, shortly after graduating high school, Christy was working hard at her job at Round Table Pizza. While working her shift on April 30th, 1990, Christy was said to be euphoric, almost detached from reality. She was always cheerful, always dependable, but something else was happening beneath the surface. Unknown to her family at the time, Christy had developed a deep, unshakable obsession with a married coworker. She imagined a future that didn't exist, fantasized about a wedding, about children. After her shift, she got in her car and drove for hours, winding through the dark roads of the Redwood Forest. Eventually, the car got stuck in the mud. Christy tried to free it by gunning the engine over and over until it overheated, with the car eventually catching fire. By the time it was discovered, the interior was completely destroyed. It was a bizarre and freak accident, almost like something out of a movie. But for Christy, it seemed to be the trigger for a complete psychological breakdown. The morning after Christy's car was found, a strange sight caught the attention of railroad workers along the Skunk train tracks, 13 miles south of Fort Bragg. A young woman, dazed and disoriented, was stumbling through the trees when one of the workers recognized her and called her parents. Bob and Susan Krebs raced to the scene to find Christy, who at first glance seemed okay. But as they drove her back into town, something wasn't right. Christy started chanting, patting herself, and muttering things that didn't make sense. They took her straight to the hospital. In the exam room, she continued acting erratic and disconnected from reality. For an entire week, Christy was almost completely incoherent. And for more than a month, she had no idea who she was, or who anyone else was. At first, doctors suspected an unusual or synthetic substance she had taken, but the tests came back clean. There was nothing in her system. Over the next few months, Christy was hospitalized 4 separate times. Each visit brought new questions and few answers. Eventually, doctors made a diagnosis. Christy had suffered a psychotic break that had been brought on by trauma. It explained the memory loss, the confusion, the erratic behavior. Her parents feared she might never come back from it. But slowly, through therapy, medication, and support, she started to improve. Her memories returned. Her behavior stabilized. And after 6 long months, Christy was released from the hospital. Her therapist suggested she ease back into the work world, at least part-time to start, just 20 hours a week. Christy took her recovery seriously. She landed a job and did well. In fact, she was thriving. Soon she picked up a second job at a local Burger King. Both employers began calling her in more and more, and for the first time in years it looked like Christy had found her footing again. But that hope wouldn't last. According to her father, Christy's life had become a whirlwind. She was working 5, sometimes 6 hours at each of her 2 jobs, often putting in 12-hour days. In between shifts, she was going to the health club. Christy was pushing herself, sleeping less, always trying to stay busy, and by doing so, she believed she could stay in control. 3 years passed since her breakdown, and while everything looked great on the surface, her parents were growing uneasy. To them, Christy's breakneck pace reminded them of a pattern, one they'd seen before. They voiced their concerns, but Christy insisted she was fine. Then came the night of August 9th, 1993. At Round Table Pizza, her manager noticed something unusual. Christy was in a strangely good mood, extremely upbeat. He asked her why she was so happy, and her reply was cryptic. "It's not what you think." At around 10 p.m., Christy clocked out and told coworkers she was heading home. But she didn't go home. She was next seen in the parking lot of McCarricher State Park, north of Fort Bragg. A park ranger spoke to her just before closing time. She said she was fine, just relaxing after work. He would be the last person to ever speak to Christy Krebs. After that, she left the park and drove south, right through Fort Bragg and into the dark heart of Redwood Forest. Somewhere off a dirt road, she got stuck in the mud again, almost the exact same spot where her previous breakdown had occurred 3 years earlier. This time, she gunned the engine until 2 of the tires blew. Her father believes that moment, stuck in the mud, deep in the woods, triggered something inside her. A flashback to 3 years prior, a second psychotic break. She may have panicked and wandered into a creek, trying to make sense of the surreal déjà vu playing out around her. Eventually, she returned to her car, took off her wet work clothes and changed into gym clothes she always carried. Then she opened her wallet, tore up photos of her family and friends, and scattered them around the car in the midst of her breakdown. While there have been credible sightings and reports of Christy throughout the years, as of 2025, Christy Krebs remains missing, and her disappearance still unsolved. Selena Eden was born on March 17, 1962, and by all accounts, she was a remarkable child. In high school, she wasn't just popular, she was a leader. She was student body president, senior class president, and she always marched to her own beat. After graduation in 1980, she made an unexpected move. She dropped out of college and joined the Air Force. Not long after, she left the military and became a journeyman construction worker in San Francisco. She joined the Teamsters, bought herself a motorcycle, and carved out a life on her own terms. Her mother, Clarissa, described her as brave and funny. But everything changed on November 29, 1989. That day, Selena was heading home from a union hall in downtown San Francisco. As she rode her motorcycle through the city streets, a pickup truck made a sudden left turn in front of her. She didn't have time to react. The collision sent her flying onto the pavement. Emergency responders rushed her to the hospital, but with her belongings scattered in the chaos, she was admitted as a Jane Doe. 7 long days would pass before her family, her brother Dion and mother Clarissa, were finally located in San Diego. By then, Selena was in a coma, having suffered extensive brain damage. She remained unconscious for 6 weeks, and when she finally awoke, the road ahead would be anything but easy. Selena remembered her family, but much of her past was gone. Her best friend Lori said the accident changed everything. It had stripped her of her personality. She was like a child again. So many of the things she had learned were simply gone. Physically, the damage was devastating. Her left thigh had been crushed. Her left eye was permanently damaged. She experienced near-constant headaches. And worst of all, a traumatic brain injury had caused dangerous fluid to collect around her brain. But even after all that, Selena did what she'd always done. She fought. She dove headfirst into an exhausting physical therapy regimen, pushing her body and her mind to recover. Selena's mother says she was a tough patient, the kind you have to slow down. Even when she could barely stand, she wanted to walk. Even when her body wasn't ready, she insisted she was. It was like she was in a race, rushing to return to the life she once knew. But despite her determination, there were still so many things she just couldn't do. Her brother Dion believed the hardest part for her was accepting that she wasn't well yet. 2 months after the accident, Dion brought Selena back home to San Diego. She moved in with her mom, continuing her recovery through outpatient therapy. But her mother began to notice something wasn't right. The confusion was getting worse. Clarissa says that as a mother, she could see things the doctors didn't. Changes in Selena's personality, unexplained mood swings. And some days she could be downright mean. Clarissa came to recognize the pattern of anger followed by the headaches. But over time, the headaches gave way to something more troubling: a deep, persistent confusion. Selena would be talking to someone on the phone, hang up, and then ask her mother who she was just talking to. Anytime Selena forgot something, it made her furious. Not at anyone else, but at herself. And slowly her frustration turned into a kind of desperation. She wanted to live on her own and to reclaim her independence. With her recovery stalled, Selena made a bold decision. In May of 1990, she returned to San Francisco, hoping that being back in familiar surroundings might help her heal. Her friend Lori remembers that Selena seemed happy to be back, happy to be near her old friends. But Lori could see what others may have missed. Selena wasn't well. She was forgetful, unaware of basic things. And Lori felt strongly that Selena should not have been living on her own. Selena stayed in the habit of calling her mother, never going too long without checking in. Until one day in October of 1990, almost a year after the accident, Selena's mom received a call she would never forget. Selena told her mother she was going away for a while, that she had met someone who promised to be kind. Clarissa pleaded with her to come home, but Selena said, "Don't worry if you don't hear from me in a month or two. I'll be calling you soon." And then she hung up. That was the last time Clarissa ever heard her daughter's voice. On New Year's Eve, 1991, over a year after Selena disappeared, Lori's answering machine picked up a call. There was a voice on the tape. It was garbled, hard to understand, but unmistakably it was Selena. That was the last time anyone heard from her. On the morning of September 6th, 1988, 73-year-old Lily Mae Huff vanished without a word and without a trace, after having breakfast at the Welcome Haven nursing home in Winchester, Virginia. She had only been living at the facility for about 3 months. Staff described her as gentle, quiet, and was prone to wandering. It was a known issue, something they monitored carefully. Because of her fragile condition, Lily was usually restrained to a wheelchair as a safety precaution. She rarely moved around unattended. That morning, Lily sat waiting patiently in the hallway. An aide was supposed to give her a bath. But in those few unsupervised minutes, Lily slipped away. She exited through the dining room's patio door, the only exit in the entire facility not wired with an alarm. No one saw her leave. No one noticed she was gone until it was too late. Within hours, staff realized Lily was missing. A full-scale search was launched involving local police, volunteers, and search dogs. For 5 days, crews scoured the grounds around the nursing home, the woods, and nearby neighborhoods. They checked hospitals, questioned passersby, and followed up on every lead. But they found nothing. No clothing, no footprints, no sign of struggle. It was as if Lily Mae Huff had simply walked out of the world. To this day, no one knows what happened to her. Across continents and centuries, they've surfaced. Carved in wood, shaped in stone, etched into temple walls. Strange figures left behind by people long gone. They don't speak. They don't explain. But they don't feel random either. In the misty bogs of northern Germany, 2 towering wooden beings, male and female, were buried together, their mouths open in a silent scream. In the highlands of Scotland, a lone wooden woman with quartz eyes was laid face down by the edge of a loch, her purpose still unknown. Thousands of miles away in Iraq, reptilian figures with almond eyes cradle lizard-headed babies, their meaning lost to time. Deep in the Cambodian jungle, a carving hidden in temple stone sparked a modern mystery, an animal that looks just slightly like a dinosaur. And in the soils of West Africa, soapstone figures emerge with wide eyes and crouched stances, the only surviving traces of a forgotten civilization. These are the outliers, the artifacts that don't fit, the ones no one can quite explain. No clear origin, no written history, just the lingering feeling that whoever made them was trying to tell us something, and we still haven't figured out what. In 1947, in a peat bog near the village of Brock in northern Germany, something strange came out of the ground. 2 wooden figures, tall, human-shaped, and carved from oak, were pulled from the layers of soil where they'd been buried for over 2,000 years. They became known as the Brock Bog figures. 1 male, 1 female. The male stands nearly 3 meters tall, the female about 2.5. Both were carved from naturally forked branches, giving them broad legs and a strong central trunk. Their arms were once attached in sockets, now long gone. Their eyes may once have held small stones. They weren't simple carvings. The female figure wears her hair in a top knot and has been carefully shaped. The male figure has short bangs, and signs that his nethers were once carved in, then later cut off. Not far from the figures, archaeologists found signs of fire, broken pottery, and a ring of stones, all pointing to some kind of ritual or ceremony. The figures themselves were dated to between the 4th and 2nd centuries, but the tradition they belong to is much older. Dozens of similar wooden figures have been found across northern Europe, from the Neolithic era all the way into the Middle Ages. The Brock figures, though, are the largest of their kind ever found in Germany. The fact that they were discovered together, a man and a woman, has led some researchers to believe they represent fertility deities, placed in the ground to honor or appeal to forces of nature. Others suggest they might have represented ancestors or protective spirits. There's even a theory that they were meant to scare, warnings rather than blessings. Whatever they were meant to be, they were clearly important, carefully made, deliberately placed, and left in a bog where time would forget them, until now. At the beginning of the 20th century, archaeologists digging at a small mound in southern Iraq made a discovery that didn't quite fit. It was at Tel al-Ubaid, a prehistoric site dating back more than 7,000 years, and what they found were figurines. Human-shaped, but not entirely human. The figures had elongated skulls, almond-shaped eyes, and long, tapering faces. Their noses were narrow and lizard-like, and yet they weren't monsters. Some were posed in completely ordinary, even intimate scenes. One female figure, for example, was shown nursing a baby. But the infant? Also reptilian. These artifacts are now known as the Ubaid lizard figures. They date to a culture that predates the Sumerians, the Ubaidians, who lived between 5,500 and 4,000 BC. Their origins are unknown, but we do know they built organized settlements with paved streets, open courtyards, and large mud brick homes. They irrigated their land, they farmed, and in places like Eridu and Ur, sites that would later become centers of Sumerian civilization, they built temples and public buildings on a monumental scale. So who were these lizard figures supposed to represent? The figurines were both male and female. Many wore what looked like helmets and shoulder padding. Some held staffs or scepters, possibly symbols of leadership or divine authority, but none of them seem particularly ritualistic. Their body language is calm, even domestic. There's nothing exaggerated or aggressive. No signs of war, sacrifice, or fear, which makes them even stranger. Archaeologists still can't explain them. Some have wondered if they represented mythological beings or deities, perhaps linked to serpent symbolism, which appears throughout ancient Mesopotamian religion. The god Enki, for instance, was associated with water and wisdom, and the serpent. Later myths tell of secret brotherhoods and symbols passed down through snake imagery, like the so-called Brotherhood of the Snake. If there is a connection between lizards, gods, and ancient symbols that survived across millennia, we don't know about it. No texts mention the figures directly. No temples were built in their image. All we have are these strange, silent relics, humanoid, reptilian, and completely out of place. Whatever they meant, they were important enough to make, to pose, to preserve, and then to be buried, waiting thousands of years to be seen again. In 1880, on the western shore of Loch Leven in the Scottish Highlands, workers digging on the grounds of a clergyman's estate uncovered something strange beneath the peat. It was a wooden figure, 5 feet tall, carved from alder, and lying face down under nearly 5 feet of earth. She became known as the Ballachulish figure. No other object like her has ever been found in Scotland. The site where she was buried was once a raised beach, likely the shoreline of the loch in ancient times. She'd been surrounded by a kind of wicker framework, deliberately placed and then buried. It looked intentional, like a ritual, like someone had carefully laid her to rest. Early reports assumed she was carved from oak. Others thought she might represent a Norse goddess. Later research suggested she was far older than first believed. Radiocarbon dating now places her around 600 BC, during the early Iron Age, centuries before written records in Scotland. Some have called her a fertility goddess. Others have tried to link her to the Cailleach Bure, a figure from later Celtic mythology often described as a winter spirit or divine hag. But there's no clear proof. No names, no inscriptions, no legends that mention her. What we do know is this: she was carved with intent. She once stood upright, watching over the edge of the loch. And someone, for reasons we'll never fully understand, buried her face down beneath the earth. Tucked deep in the Cambodian jungle, the Temple of Ta Prohm is best known for its haunting beauty. Tree roots twisting through ancient stone, slowly reclaiming a forgotten world. But hidden among its many carvings is something far more puzzling. A creature, chiseled in bas relief, with a shape that, at first glance, looks eerily familiar. Some say it's a dinosaur. The carving is small, barely noticed among the temple's thousands of intricate details. It shows an animal with a thick body, short legs, and a line of what appear to be large, rounded plates running down its back, a feature many have compared to a stegosaurus. That single detail turned this carving into a lightning rod for fringe theories. Creationist groups and cryptozoologists have pointed to it as supposed evidence that humans once lived alongside non-avian dinosaurs. But there's a problem. Almost everything else about the figure doesn't match a stegosaurus at all. The proportions are wrong. The animal has a large head, a short neck, and legs of equal length. There's no sign of the iconic spiked tail, or thagomizer, that stegosaurs are known for. In fact, some researchers argue the plates on its back aren't part of the creature at all, but stylized lotus leaves, a common design element repeated in carvings throughout the temple. Its large head and broad snout are consistent with a rhino, possibly even the now extinct Bornean rhinoceros, once native to Southeast Asia. Others believe it could be a mythical creature, like many others carved nearby, including one figure with a monkey's head on a dog's body. There's also the theory that the carving might not be ancient at all. Some suggest it was added, or altered, much more recently. The figure appears lighter than the surrounding stone, which could be a sign of tampering, or just the result of cleaning or repeated handling by curious visitors. Whatever the case, the Ta Prohm dinosaur wasn't famous until the late 1990s, when it appeared in a guidebook. Since then, it's been endlessly circulated online, often stripped of context, and used to support claims that mainstream science flatly rejects. Because the truth is, there's no evidence dinosaurs survived into the age of temples and empires. The fossil record is clear. Non-avian dinosaurs went extinct 66 million years ago. And no society, not even one as advanced as the Khmer Empire, could have seen one and left only a single vague carving behind. Still, the mystery remains to this day. Scattered across the lands of Sierra Leone and Liberia, buried in fields, tucked beside homes, and sometimes hidden deep beneath the soil, are small stone figures with wide eyes and strange expressions. They're called Nomoli figurines, and no one knows exactly where they came from. Portuguese explorers first wrote about them in the 1400s, already ancient by that time. Today they're considered some of the earliest known artwork from the region. Carved from soapstone, limestone, steatite, and even granite, the figures are often shown crouching, holding small objects with long, oval-shaped heads and stylized features. But what's most unusual is what surrounds them: silence. No written record, no clear oral tradition, no known builders or rulers to connect them to. They're the only surviving traces of a lost civilization, one that existed long before colonial maps gave this land a name. The local people that now inhabit the area have adopted the figurines into their spiritual practices. Some are placed in homes for protection. Others are buried in fields to bless crops and ensure a good harvest. They're also used as oracles, sources of wisdom and guidance. And even far from home, their presence carries meaning. When Sierra Leonean immigrants moved abroad in the 20th century, many brought Nomoli figurines with them, not just as cultural artifacts, but as links to ancestral power and protection. The deeper the figurines are found underground, the better preserved they tend to be. Some seem almost untouched by time. But what culture created them, and what caused them to disappear, leaving only stone behind? In 1669, a man was arrested near Calais under the name Eustache Dauger. He was taken into custody, quietly, without trial or explanation. A few weeks later, he vanished into the French prison system, and for the next 34 years he would remain behind bars. Not just imprisoned, but silenced, hidden, forgotten. And always under the watch of the same jailer, Bénigne de Saint-Mars, through 4 different prisons, including the infamous Bastille. To this day, no one knows who he really was. He would become known simply as the Man in the Iron Mask, an anonymous prisoner kept under extraordinary secrecy during the reign of Louis XIV. Over the centuries, the mystery continued to grow. Some said he was a disgraced noble. Others believed he was a political prisoner, perhaps a Marshal of France, or even the Duke of Beaufort. One rumor claimed he was the illegitimate son of Oliver Cromwell. Another, that he was a twin brother of the king himself. Even Voltaire, writing decades later, claimed the prisoner was the older secret brother of King Louis XIV, hidden away to protect the crown. What little we know about the Man in the Iron Mask comes from a handful of documents, mostly letters between the jailer, Saint-Mars, and Louis XIV's Minister of War, Marquis de Louvois. But these were uncovered centuries later, in the 1800s. According to those records, the prisoner was said to be arrested not for who he was, but for what he'd done, though what exactly that was remains a mystery. Louvois ordered that his cell at the prison of Pignerol be sealed with multiple doors, one within another, designed to prevent anyone from overhearing conversations inside. Only Saint-Mars was permitted to see him, and only once a day, when delivering his meals. Despite the later legend, the prisoner did not wear a mask of iron. Contemporary accounts describe a mask made of black velvet, worn only during transfers between prisons or during rare appearances at prayer. Modern historians believe the mask itself may have been used more for theatrical effect than security, a tactic by Saint-Mars to elevate his own status by suggesting he guarded someone important. In 1698, when Saint-Mars was promoted to governor of the Bastille, the prisoner came with him, kept in isolation in the Bertaudiere Tower. The Man in the Iron Mask died there, on November 19, 1703, taking his secret to the grave. The name on his burial certificate, Marchioli. That name led some historians to suspect he was Ercole Antonio Mattioli, an Italian diplomat who'd betrayed French secrets. But others aren't convinced. But after 300 years of speculation, only one thing remains certain. Whoever he was, the effort to erase him was deliberate and exhaustive. During the American Revolution, the battlefield wasn't the only place the war was fought. Another war was unfolding in the shadows, one of secrets, false names, and coded letters. In 1778, with New York City under British control, General George Washington and Major Benjamin Tallmadge created a secret spy network. It was called the Culper Ring. Their mission was simple: gather intelligence, stay hidden, and never get caught. And some of their most successful spies in the Culper Ring were women. They were underestimated, overlooked, and in many cases never even suspected. While barred from military service, women like those in the Culper Ring played a vital role in turning the tide of war, passing messages, gathering secrets, and slipping through enemy lines unnoticed. One of them is remembered only by a number, Agent 355. Her real name was never recorded. The number itself, 355, was code. In the Culper Ring's cipher system, it simply meant lady. She is officially mentioned just once, in a letter from Abraham Woodhull, known by the alias Samuel Culper Sr., who wrote to Washington that she was one who hath been ever serviceable to this correspondence. That single phrase is all we have. No name, no details. Operating deep inside British-controlled New York City, Agent 355 risked everything to pass on critical intelligence to the American cause. She tracked troop movements, supply chains, and strategic plans. Information that shaped real decisions made by General George Washington on the battlefield. She worked in silence. She blended in. And the details of her life, even her name, remain unknown. But what little can be pieced together suggests she wasn't just any informant. She may have held a degree of social standing, possibly recruited by Abraham Woodhull himself. She likely lived in the heart of occupied New York and had contact with high-ranking British officers. One theory holds that she was a loyalist by birth, from a family trusted by the British, which would have given her direct access to sensitive conversations. Another suggests she wasn't a formal member of the Culper Ring at all, but a woman with key information passed along by intermediaries. Either way, the risk was enormous. Some historians question whether Agent 355 was a real person or a myth born from patriot storytelling, while others believe she may have helped expose Benedict Arnold's treason. In 1780, she was reportedly arrested. Pregnant at the time, she was imprisoned aboard the HMS Jersey, a British prison ship known for its horrific conditions. There she is believed to have given birth, and died shortly after. Her story, pieced together from fragments, has never been fully verified. Dozens of women have been proposed as possible candidates, but none confirmed. Whether real or legend, Agent 355 has become a symbol of the hidden roles women played in the fight for independence and of the silent contributions that shaped the founding of a nation. We may never know who she was, but the war she helped fight couldn't have been won without people like her. Between 1918 and 1919, the city of New Orleans lived in fear. A killer was on the loose, a figure who slipped silently into homes at night, striking without warning and vanishing just as quickly. No motive, no pattern the police could prove. Just bodies, blood, and an axe. They called him the Axeman of New Orleans. His attacks began in May 1918 and continued until October the following year. In nearly every case, the method was the same. A back door was chiseled open, the tool left behind as if to send a message, and the killer would strike with an axe, often one he found in the victim's own home. Sometimes he used a straight razor. There was no sign of robbery. Nothing was ever taken. Most of the victims were Italian immigrants or Italian Americans, leading many to believe the killings were ethnically targeted. Some believed he only killed men when they got in the way, that his real targets were women. But nothing was ever proven. No one was ever arrested. Then came the letter. On March 13, 1919, newspapers across the city published a letter said to be from the Axeman himself. In it, he claimed he would strike again at exactly 12:15 a.m. on March 19th, but said he would spare any home playing live jazz music. Some dismissed the letter as a hoax. Others were convinced the killer had spoken. That night, all across New Orleans, dance halls were packed. Amateur bands played in crowded homes. Jazz spilled into the streets. Not for celebration, but survival. And just as the letter promised, no one was killed. After that, the Axeman's spree ended, as suddenly as it had begun. He was never caught, never identified. Over the years, dozens of names have been proposed, suspects ranging from petty criminals to shadowy figures with ties to organized crime. But none have ever been confirmed. The Axeman of New Orleans left behind a trail of blood, fear, and one of the most chilling unsolved mysteries in American history. The Count of Saint-Germain was a man who seemed to appear out of nowhere, rich, refined, and connected to nearly every royal court in 18th century Europe. Yet no one could say for sure who he was, where he came from, or how he always seemed to be everywhere, all at once. He first emerged in London around 1745, claiming to be the son of a Transylvanian prince. Some said he was Portuguese nobility. Others insisted he was Spanish or Italian. But no country ever took credit for him, and no verifiable birth record has ever been found. He spoke at least 6 languages fluently, played the violin like a virtuoso, painted, wrote music, and held conversations about world events with the casual detail of someone who had lived through them. He also had an uncanny knowledge of science, chemistry, and medicine. He dabbled in alchemy and claimed he could purify gems and remove flaws from diamonds, claims that earned him an audience with kings and queens. He never seemed to age. Over the decades, eyewitnesses described him looking exactly the same. In France, he became a favorite at the court of Louis XV, who used him as a diplomatic envoy. He once spent 5 years in Versailles and never once ate a bite of food in public. When asked about it, he claimed to live on a special elixir, and hinted that he'd discovered the secret to immortality. Voltaire once called him a man who knows everything and who never dies. Even his death did nothing to stop the rumors. The Count was reported to have died in 1784 in Germany. But after that, people kept seeing him. He was spotted in Paris in 1789 during the French Revolution. In 1821, he was seen in Milan. In the 1880s, a woman claimed he was living in New Orleans, still alive, still unchanged. He was seen in Rome in 1896 and again in California in 1930. He never left behind personal writings, no letters, no memoirs, just third-party accounts, royal records, and stories. Some firsthand, others passed down like legend. Some believe he was a master of disguise and deception, using aliases and smoke and mirror tactics to create the illusion of eternal life. Others say he was a charlatan, brilliant but human. And then there are those who think the Count of Saint-Germain wasn't a man at all, but something else entirely. No birth certificate, no confirmed grave, just a name, a face, and a mystery that has refused to die for over 300 years. She was young, beautiful, and completely unknown. Around the 1880s, the body of a young woman was pulled from the River Seine in Paris. No one knew who she was. There were no witnesses, no identification, no reports of a missing person that matched her. Authorities estimated she was around 16 years old, and the cause of death was drowning. Her body showed no signs of violence, but no one could be completely sure. She was never claimed by family, never named. And yet, she would become one of the most recognizable faces in history. At the city morgue, the pathologist, reportedly taken by the peaceful, almost smiling expression on her face, asked for a plaster cast of her features to be made. It became known as the death mask of l'inconnue de la Seine, the unknown woman of the Seine. The mask spread quickly through Paris. Artists, writers, and philosophers were captivated by her serene expression. Copies were made and sold across Europe. Her face became a muse for painters, sculptors, and poets who projected stories onto her. Tragic, romantic, and often invented. By the early 20th century, her face was everywhere, hanging on walls and appearing in literature. The surreal quality of her expression gave rise to a myth that she had died willingly, almost joyfully, slipping away from life with calm acceptance. But the real mystery remained. Who was she? No record was ever found. No name ever confirmed. Over the years, countless theories were proposed, that she was an actress, a factory worker, a noblewoman, but none were ever proven. Then, in a strange twist of fate, her likeness took on a second life. In the 1950s, a Norwegian toymaker named Asmund Lerdahl used her face as the model for Resusci Anne, the CPR training mannequin used around the world. Her expression, once cast from death, was now helping to teach people how to save lives. To this day, she remains anonymous. L'inconnue de la Seine, a nameless girl who drowned in Paris, yet became one of the most reproduced faces in human history. A mystery in life, a legend in death. Our first story starts on a quiet night in western Spain, November 12th, 1976, at Talavera La Real Air Base, not far from the city of Badajoz. It was calm, still, nothing out of the ordinary. Then suddenly the radar lit up. An unknown object had entered the airspace, fast, unpredictable, and pulling off moves no aircraft should be able to make. The object was making impossible turns, stopping on a dime to change direction, and showed off bursts of speed that no known plane could match. It was like physics didn't apply to this object. This wasn't a glitch. The readings were clear. Whatever it was real. Within minutes, 2 F-4 Phantom jets were scrambled from Torrejon Air Base. Their orders were simple: intercept the object, identify it, and if necessary, neutralize it. The pilots were pros, experienced, calm under pressure. But what they locked eyes on that night shook them. A massive disc-shaped object, glowing from within with a pulsing red-orange light. The pilots reported that it seemed aware of them, like it was toying with them. Every time they tried to close the gap, the object would shoot away, keeping just the right distance, almost like it knew exactly how far to stay ahead. One pilot reported his controls going haywire. His instruments failed, his radio filled with static, and for a few tense moments, he was flying blind. The encounter stretched on for hours. A high-stakes chase across the night sky, fighter jets versus something they couldn't explain. Meanwhile, back on base, radar kept tracking it, and on the ground, people across the region were reporting strange lights in the sky. Then, just as the sun began to rise, it was gone. No trace, no wreckage, no answers. All that was left were stunned pilots, hours of confusing data, and a question that still haunts everyone involved. What did they see that night? Let's roll the clock way back to December 21st, 1663, centuries before satellites, radar, or even electricity, to the frozen heart of Russia. Long before the Tunguska blast made headlines, this remote stretch of wilderness experienced something just as terrifying, maybe even worse. What happened that night became the stuff of legend, whispered through generations, becoming cemented into local lore and eventually documented history. Eyewitness accounts describe a second, scorching sun suddenly appearing in the sky. A colossal fireball tore through the atmosphere. It didn't just glow, it burned. A searing trail of smoke and fire followed behind, and then came the sound. A roar so loud it wasn't just heard, it was felt. It thundered through the air, shook buildings, rattled bones, and made the very ground tremble. And then, the impact. A blinding, earth-shaking, sky-splitting explosion. Forests were leveled for miles. Trees splintered like matchsticks. But the real question is what caused it. And the leading theory is that it was either a meteor or comet. Something massive and moving fast, slamming into Earth with unimaginable force. But here's the thing. Despite the destruction, no clear evidence of a crater was ever found. No fragments of rock, no extraterrestrial debris, nothing solid to study. Just devastation. Some scientists believe it was an airburst, a cometary fragment exploding high in the atmosphere, unleashing its power from above. That would explain the lack of impact crater and the widespread destruction. Others, though, aren't so quick to settle on the standard answers. They wonder if it could have been something else. Something not of this world. Whatever the cause, one thing is clear. This event is yet another reminder that out there in space, the universe doesn't need permission to reach down and shake our planet. In the uneasy quiet after World War II, just as the smoke cleared and nations began to rebuild, something new began to haunt the skies. It started in 1946. From the forests of Sweden to the fjords of Norway, the reports came in. Shining metallic objects, silent, cigar-shaped, rocket-like, moving with impossible speed, and then vanishing. They were called ghost rockets. These weren't just isolated sightings. Hundreds of people saw them, including military officers, commercial pilots, engineers, farmers, and civilians simply walking home. All described the same thing, objects that darted across the sky or hovered motionless as if watching them. Many of these sightings happened in broad daylight, with clear skies, so there was no doubt and no excuses. Swedish military intelligence sounded the alarm. Radar stations picked up unidentified targets, confirming what people were seeing with their own eyes. Fighter jets were scrambled, but no matter how fast they flew, the ghost rockets stayed one step ahead, disappearing at the last second or performing maneuvers that made no aerodynamic sense. Theories swirled that they were Soviet weapons tests, Nazi tech that was resurrected, secret missiles stolen from the ruins of war. But the evidence didn't fit. These things moved too fast, too smart. They didn't behave like weapons. In some cases, metallic fragments were recovered, tiny bits of something strange, found at supposed crash sites. But lab tests on the materials were inconclusive. The sightings slowed by the end of the decade. The ghost rockets faded into silence. To this day, no one has ever explained what flew through the skies that year. In the summer of 2001, something surreal unfolded in the southwestern corner of India. That year, in Kerala, the sky bled. From July 25th to September 23rd, the rain came down red. It stained rooftops, clothes, and the streets in a vivid crimson color. It looked like something out of myth or nightmare. And it wasn't a one-off. This phenomenon hit district after district, always the same. Brief, intense bursts of blood-colored rain. Locals were stunned. Scientists were baffled. Something was clearly happening and no one knew what. At first, the theories were simple. Maybe a meteor had exploded in the upper atmosphere, scattering particles that dyed the monsoon rains. But that idea fell apart fast. A meteor couldn't explain weeks of red rainfall across hundreds of miles. So scientists mobilized. Fast. Teams from India's top research institutions collected rainwater samples and raced them into laboratories. What they found under the microscope stopped them cold. Suspended in the red water were countless microscopic cells, perfectly uniform, reddish-orange in color, and alive. But no dust, no pollen, no soil, just cells. The first wave of analysis leaned towards something terrestrial, perhaps airborne spores or algae swept up from treetops by strong winds. A rare phenomenon, sure, but not impossible. Then came the second wave. Dr. Godfrey Lewis and Dr. Santosh Kumar, two physicists from Mahatma Gandhi University, took a deeper look and dropped a scientific bombshell. They reported that the mysterious cells contained no DNA. None. And that changed everything. Because DNA is the building block of all life as we know it. Every cell, every organism, every tree, fish, bacterium, it all starts with DNA. If these cells truly lacked it, then they weren't from here. The two researchers proposed something bold and wildly controversial, that these cells were extraterrestrial in origin, not from Earth, but from space. They suggested that some cosmic object, maybe a comet or meteor, disintegrated in the upper atmosphere, scattering microbial life into Earth's rain clouds. And with that, the red rain of Kerala became more than a curiosity. It became a touchstone in the ongoing debate about panspermia, the idea that life on Earth might have been seeded from the stars. Mainstream scientists pushed back. Hard. They pointed to lab contamination, or faulty testing, or the likelihood that DNA was simply hidden, not absent. But others were captivated by the possibility. Because if life could arrive here quietly, from the sky, maybe it did. Roughly 11,000 light-years away, within the constellation of Cassiopeia, lies the ruins of a once mighty star. What we see now is the aftermath, an immense, expanding shell of superheated gas and stellar debris, the remnant of a supernova. Cassiopeia A is like an open wound in space, the ghost of a star that died in spectacular fashion, unleashing a blast so powerful it outshone entire galaxies for a brief, blinding moment. And yet, no one saw it happen. Let that sink in. Supernovae are among the most luminous events in the cosmos. For weeks, sometimes months, they blaze bright enough to be seen with the naked eye, even in daylight. Yet despite detailed historical records of celestial events, painstakingly compiled by astronomers and record keepers across cultures and time, there's no definitive account of the Cassiopeia A supernova from Earth. Based on its meticulously measured expansion rate, astronomers have managed to pinpoint the explosion to around 1680 AD. And this timing is absolutely crucial, because by the late 17th century, humanity was watching. Telescopes had taken root in Europe and Asia. Astronomers were documenting the night sky with unprecedented precision, logging every comet, every flare, every flicker. So how did we miss this? One leading theory is that the star's light was smothered, hidden behind thick clouds of interstellar dust. Another possibility, the supernova itself was unusually faint, a rare atypical burst. But there is one tantalizing clue. In 1680, English astronomer John Flamsteed noted a faint star in the region, a curious, fleeting point of light in Cassiopeia. He made a single entry, wondering if it may have been a supernova, but then moved on. It's possible that what he saw in 1680 was the supernova explosion, but the record's too vague to be certain. Even modern forensic techniques, like studying polar ice cores for traces of cosmic ray byproducts, have come up inconclusive. Today, Cassiopeia A is anything but invisible. We observe it across the entire electromagnetic spectrum, in radio waves, in X-rays, and in color images pulled from deep space observatories. What we see is stunning. Rippling shock waves, churning clouds of gas, elements forged in the heart of a dead star now scattered across light years, ready to become something new. And this isn't just about the leftover wreckage of a supernova. It's a cosmic engine of rebirth, enriching the galaxy with the very ingredients of life: carbon, oxygen, and iron. But its greatest mystery remains unsolved, which is how something so bright could die so quietly. Published in 1985, Christopher Manson's book, Maze Solve the World's Most Challenging Puzzle, was never meant to be just another book. Manson himself warned readers before starting. This was, quote, a building in the shape of a book, unquote. 96 pages, 45 rooms, every illustration hand-drawn, every room part of a grand, confounding labyrinth of logic, riddles, and deception. And for those brave enough to open the cover, there was a prize. $10,000 awarded to the first person who could solve its central mystery. The contest launched in October 1985, and Manson's challenge was threefold. First, the reader had to navigate from room 1 to room 45 and back, using exactly 16 steps. Second, they had to decode a hidden riddle buried inside room 45. Third, they had to solve that riddle, and do it while taking the shortest path possible through the maze. All the pieces were there, on the pages. But still, no one solved it completely. When the contest ended on September 1st, 1987, not a single participant had cracked the puzzle in full. 4 months later, in January of 1988, 12 entrants were announced as co-winners, all equally close, but none exact. The $10,000 prize was divided between them. Each had found the correct path through the maze, but none had fully unraveled the layered riddle at its core. And maybe that was the whole point. Maze wasn't just about the path you walked, it was about how you thought. The journey through the rooms was a decoy. The true challenge was linguistic, symbolic, cerebral. Room 45 wasn't the final destination. It was the summit. Today, the book is long out of print. But as of this year, secondhand editions sell for around $250. Not because of the long-expired contest, but because of adventure and journey through the maze. It was called the Book of Soiga. It's also known as Aldaraya, a 16th century Latin manuscript with pages detailing rituals, incantations, and astrological charts. Constellations mapped. Demons named. Angels listed by genealogy. A catalog of celestial influence and occult power. But the deeper you go, the stranger it gets. The book cites other magical texts, books that no longer exist, suggesting Soiga was just one part of a much larger lost system of knowledge. And at its heart, the mystery that has never been cracked. 36 pages, filled with 36 grids, each one packed with letters, thousands of them, 46,656 characters in total. No explanation, no key, just a wall of symbols. Its most famous owner was John Dee, Elizabethan mathematician, court astrologer to Queen Elizabeth I, and one of the most mysterious figures of the English Renaissance. To Dee, the book was no mere curiosity. He believed it held divine secrets. Secrets too complex, perhaps even too sacred, for the human mind to understand alone. So he turned to the supernatural. Between 1583 and 1589, while traveling through Europe, Dee and his scryer Edward Kelly attempted something different. They tried to consult angels. And through seances and crystal visions, they claimed to make contact with the archangel Uriel. Dee asked him directly, "What is the meaning of the tables in Soiga?" Uriel claimed the book had been revealed to Adam in paradise, and that its true interpretation was known only to the archangel Michael. Then came the warning. Any mortal who unlocks the table's secrets will die within 2.5 years. After Dee's death in the early 1600s, the book vanished for centuries. It was thought to be lost, scattered with the ashes of a forgotten occult age. Then, in 1994, the impossible happened. Not one, but 2 copies of the Book of Soiga were rediscovered. One in the British Library, the other in the Bodleian Library at Oxford. The text was once again available. Enter Jim Reeds, mathematician, cryptologist, and one of the few minds prepared to face the manuscript on its own terms. Over a decade of painstaking study, Reeds unlocked something extraordinary. In 2006, he cracked the code behind the book's 36 tables. Using a mathematical formula, he determined how each grid was constructed. At the core of each one, a unique seed word, the starting point for generating the letter sequences that fill the tables. He even identified shared errors in both surviving manuscripts, revealing they were likely copied from the same flawed original. But here's the paradox. We now understand how the tables were made. We still don't know why. The purpose, the message, the meaning behind the patterns remains unknown. Reeds himself noted that another section of the book, Liber Radiorum, lists code words for 23 of the tables, along with number sequences whose relationship to the words is still a mystery. A cipher where the math is clear, but the intent is not. Some believe the tables are more than puzzles, that they represent the structure of the cosmos itself. That would align with John Dee's own beliefs, his search for a universal language of creation, rooted in sacred geometry, Kabbalistic magic, and the hidden harmonies of numbers and names. For Dee, science and mysticism weren't separate pursuits. They were 2 sides of the same divine truth. Nearly 5 centuries later, the tables still sit mysteriously. Not because they can't be read, but because they haven't yet been understood. In 1982, The Secret, written by Byron Price, was published. Illustrated by celebrated fantasy artist John Jude Palancar, the book paired 12 mysterious images with 12 cryptic verses. Each image and verse were meant to guide the reader to a specific location, a real-world landmark in a North American city where a cask waited underground. Hidden somewhere in North America were 12 ceramic casks, each one buried in secret, each containing a key. Exchange that key, and you'd receive a jewel. But the real prize, Price insisted, wasn't the gem. It was the journey. The challenge was twofold. First, match the correct painting to the correct verse. Then, interpret the combined clues to navigate through a specific city, from broad, iconic locations to hidden exact coordinates. Every cask was buried by Price himself, often in disguise, while he was dressed as a construction worker. Each one sealed inside a plexiglass box, placed inches below the surface in public spaces. Every element was deliberate. Every clue was solvable using only the tools available in the early 1980s. Yet even with thousands of treasure hunters poring over the book, only 3 casks have ever been found. The first surfaced in 1983, unearthed by a group of students in Chicago's Grant Park. In 2004, a second cask was discovered in Cleveland, thanks to a growing online community. The third appeared in 2019, in Boston. The remaining 9 are still buried, still hidden. Byron Price died in a car accident in 2005. He left behind no map, no master list, no written record of the exact burial sites. His estate has pledged to honor the rewards. But without Price, the only person who truly knew where the casks lie, the task becomes vastly harder. Decades of urban development have reshaped parks and cities. Trees have been cut down, fences removed, landmarks altered or destroyed. Some clues that once pointed clearly to a location now lead only to empty space. Price likely believed his riddles would be solved quickly, that seekers would match the clues, dig a few feet, and claim their prize within years. But over 40 years later, the secret has outlived its creator, outpaced its era, and become a living legend. The question is no longer just where the treasures are, it's whether they still exist at all. During the mid-16th century, in the heart of the Habsburg Empire, an Austrian military engineer named Konrad Haas sat down to write a book. What he left behind would not be uncovered for nearly 400 years. Known today as the Sibiu manuscript, it is a 450-page document written in German, part military manual, part scientific vision. It contains calculations on artillery and ballistics, and something far more astonishing, rockets. Within its pages are detailed designs for multi-stage rockets, schematics showing combustion chambers, descriptions of propulsion systems, even the revolutionary idea of using liquid fuel, a concept that would not become reality until centuries later. One drawing depicts a cylindrical thrust chamber engineered with startling precision, a tapering core designed to expand the combustion area as fuel burns, mimicking modern principles of staged propulsion. His work predates the space age, predates Newton, predates even the telescope. Yet somehow, he described technology that wouldn't become practical until the 20th century. The manuscript wasn't discovered until the 1960s, hidden in the archives of Sibiu, Romania. And when it surfaced, it didn't just rewrite one chapter of history. It forced a rethinking of an entire timeline. But Konrad Haas left behind more than technical blueprints. Buried in the manuscript is a quiet warning, one that echoes louder today than it ever could in his own time. My advice is for more peace and no war, leaving the rifles calmly in storage, so the bullet is not fired, the gunpowder is not burned or wet, so the prince keeps his money, the arsenal master his life. That is the advice Konrad Haas gives. It was a statement of astonishing foresight, written centuries before rockets would darken the skies over Europe, before missiles became instruments of global terror, before science and warfare became so tragically intertwined. How did he see it coming? That question lingers beside the technical mystery. How did a 16th century engineer conceive of multi-stage propulsion and liquid fuel? And why did he pair that vision with a moral reckoning few others of his era would even consider? In the heart of ancient Rome, locked beneath the Temple of Jupiter on the Capitoline Hill, sat a stone chest, sealed, guarded, and feared. Inside, the Sibylline books, sacred texts said to hold the fate of an empire. Composed in Greek hexameters and veiled in mystery, the books were not scripture, but statecraft. Consulted only in times of crisis, plague, war, famine, unnatural signs in the heavens. They were Rome's divine hotline to the gods. The origin of these books are the stuff of legend. A mysterious old woman, said to be the Cumaean Sibyl, came to King Tarquin with 9 books, demanding an outrageous price. When he refused, she burned 3, then offered the remaining 6 for the same price. Again, he declined. She burned 3 more. Finally, with only 3 left, he agreed. His augurs advised him well. These weren't ordinary texts. They were a gift from the gods and a test. For centuries, the books were treated as sacred state secrets, Only high-ranking officials under Senate order could consult them. Copying them was punishable by death, but their role extended far beyond prophecy. They shaped public policy, justified foreign wars, and introduced new cults and foreign deities into Roman religious life, often with political intent. Divine will, as interpreted through the Sibylline books, could steer an empire, or save it. Yet their story is also one of fire, loss, and manipulation. In 83 BCE, the original collection was destroyed in a fire during Rome's civil war. In the decades that followed, the Senate scrambled to replace them, collecting oracles from across Italy, from temples, cities, even private citizens. But this patchwork prophecy soon drew suspicion. Around 12 BCE, Emperor Augustus, determined to unify and control the Roman religious order, ordered a purge. Thousands of texts were destroyed. Only a select few hundred, deemed genuine, were preserved. These were moved to the newly built Temple of Apollo under imperial supervision. It was a deliberate act, not just of preservation, but of curation. A rewriting of the prophetic record. A reshaping of Rome's spiritual narrative. What was lost and why remains one of history's most unsettling questions. Later emperors attempted to preserve what remained, but the books would burn again, for the final time, in 405 AD, reportedly on the order of General Stilicho. They remind us that history isn't just shaped by facts, but by secrets locked in stone boxes, and those bold enough to read them. In the summer of 1942, World War II was in full swing. Everyone on the West Coast was a little on edge. People were nervous about a possible invasion. Keeping an eye out from above and patrolling the coast for submarines was the U.S. Navy's L-8. It used to be a Goodyear advertising blimp, and she was a reliable old bird with 1,000 flights already logged without any problems whatsoever. The morning of August 16, 1942, was clear and calm. At 6:03 a.m., the L-8 took off from Treasure Island, San Francisco. Inside were Lieutenant Ernest DeWitt Cody, just 27, and his co-pilot, Ensign Charles Adams, 35, who was actually on his very first flight as a commissioned officer. They were on a pretty routine anti-submarine patrol, armed with a couple of depth charges and a machine gun. Just over an hour later, at 7:38 a.m., the L-8 crew radioed back to Treasure Island. They'd spotted something odd, an oil slick about 4 miles off the Farallon Islands. A nearby cargo ship and a fishing boat actually saw the L-8 drop down low, approximately 30 feet from the water, circling the slick. And that's it. That's the last time anyone ever saw the blimp with its crew inside. By 8:50 a.m., radio contact was totally gone. Shortly after 9 o'clock, the L-8 was seen gaining altitude, and then it turned straight for San Francisco. At 11:15, the L-8 floated back into view off Ocean Beach, near Fort Funston. It was flying very low before gently touching down on the beach. 2 guys fishing ran up to the L-8, grabbing onto the ropes hanging down. They peeked inside expecting to see the pilots, but what they saw instead was an empty cockpit. For blimps and airships, this section is called the gondola. It wasn't long before the L-8 caught the wind and bobbed up again, and the men let go of the ropes. The L-8 would proceed to bump into a nearby cliff, knocking off one of its depth charges, making the blimp lighter, and in turn made it climb higher. At the same time, the bump caused a valve to open, which slowly let out helium, slowly deflating the airship. From there, it drifted inland, floating over golf courses, scraping telephone poles and houses in San Francisco's suburbs, before landing right in the street, at 419 Bellevue Avenue in Daly City. Cops and military folks swarmed around the crash site only to find the cockpit doors open. The crash was so gentle, literally any human inside would have walked away, but Lieutenant Cody and Ensign Adams were nowhere to be found. They launched a massive search. Air, land, sea. Nothing. Not a single trace of them. After 2 days, the search was called off. At first, it was thought that the men may be bailed out over the ocean, but all 3 parachutes in the life raft were still in the blimp. The Navy's official investigation couldn't figure it out. The pilots hadn't done anything wrong. Cody and Adams were officially declared dead the next year. The main theory the Navy came up with was that one of the men opened the back hatch to drop a smoke marker over the oil slick, slipped, and started yelling for help. The other man tried to rescue him, and they both fell into the ocean. But even today, it's still a total mystery. Following the incident, the L-8 was promptly repaired and went back to work in the skies over the West Coast. What exactly happened to Lieutenant Cody and Ensign Adams is something we may never know. On April 1st, 1997, in Fort Worth, Texas, what started as an ordinary spring day quickly turned into something straight out of a medical thriller. People at the Overton Center office tower suddenly started feeling drowsy. Not just tired, but a deep, overwhelming fatigue. Then, disturbingly, some began to lose consciousness. Chaos erupted throughout the offices and ambulances swarmed the building. Over 100 people from the Fort Worth Tower alone ended up in hospitals for evaluation. Doctors found no serious infections, nothing outwardly wrong. Yet people were collapsing. And this wasn't a one-off. For 2 terrifying days in a row, more than 1,000 workers from the Overton building had to be evacuated. They all complained of the same symptoms: dizziness, pounding headaches, feeling lightheaded, trouble breathing, some even vomiting. What made it even stranger was the smell. Witnesses described it as a mysterious smoke that smelled of cheap perfume. The Fort Worth Fire Department, along with hazardous materials teams, thoroughly searched the building, going through every vent, every pipe, every corner. Despite all their efforts, they could not find the source of this mysterious, noxious odor. It was there, it was affecting people, but it was completely untraceable. And as if one unsolved mystery wasn't enough, less than a week later, just a short drive away, about 600 workers at the Centerpoint building in Arlington faced a similar terrifying ordeal. For 2 days straight, they also had to evacuate due to unexplained nausea. Fire Department spokesman Gary Pipes confirmed 10 workers were hospitalized, their blood tests totally normal. Again, hazmat teams scoured the building, and again, no source of the odor could be found. The question of what happened still lingers in the air, and the entire event is still unexplained. In a quiet, seemingly peaceful suburb in South Australia called Athelstone, there has been an inexplicable pattern of murder stretching over a century. This isn't just a string of random killings. These are known as the Athelstone murders. What makes them so chilling is that they all happened at the exact same property, every 30 years, committed by the father of the family living there. Athelstone was settled in 1838, with European farmers building a mill and a farmhouse. The name Athelstone came from John Cowles, who bought the mill in 1845. He was from a place in Cornwall called Helston, so he named his new buildings at Helston. Coles was a genuinely feared man in the community, whispered to be involved in satanic rituals. Rumor had it he was sent to Australia just to hide him from wealthy relatives, covering up some dark family secret. And the name, Helston, was actually a corrupted version of Hellstone, named after a massive ancient rock formation back in Cornwall, originally worshipped by pagans. This stone had strange symbols and writings carved so deeply it seemed impossible with the tools of the time. It's said that the very foundation of that original Athelstone mill contained a piece of the original Hellstone. Fast forward to the late 1850s, and Coles took on a protege, a young gardener named William Carrington. William, his wife Penelope, and their kids, Jacob and Meredith, settled into a nearby cottage. William was barely in his 20s, but had somehow amassed a considerably large fortune working for Coles. While other farmers' crops failed, Carrington's plants were always thriving. Locals, of course, whispered it was black magic, thanks to his association with Coles. Then, in 1862, Coles died. And just like that, Carrington's luck seemed to dry up. By early 1865, he was nearly bankrupt, a raging alcoholic, and his family was completely shunned from the community. Then came October 31st, 1865. Halloween. William Carrington was found wandering naked and covered in blood near the local post office. A police officer claimed Carrington had used the blood to trace strange designs on himself. When Carrington finally spoke during questioning, he repeated just one chilling phrase: he demanded their lives. This led police to the gruesome scene. Penelope Carrington and her 2 children were brutally murdered in their home. The local doctor, called in to deal with the horrific remains, later reported a phrase written on the bathroom wall in blood. He never said what it read. Just 3 days later, that same doctor took his own life, stabbing himself in the eyes. William Carrington was tried and convicted, sentenced to life in prison, but he then vanished from his jail cell less than a week later. He was never seen again. After the Carrington horror, that original house was demolished, and the Athelstone area was redeveloped. 30 years to the day, on October 31st, 1895, the Friedkin family was found dismembered in their new home on that same land. The father, Waldorf Friedkin, an Orthodox priest, was found wandering the streets naked and covered in blood. He was convicted, but denied everything, claiming he'd felt an unholy presence before blacking out, waking only when police arrested him. The chilling pattern continued, like clockwork, every 30 years. On October 31st, 1925, the Ullman family dismembered. The father, Roger Ullman, was found unconscious, naked, and covered in blood on the front lawn. October 31st, 1955, Eugene Stevens murdered his family and bathed in their blood. October 31st, 1985, Christopher Virgil Lester murdered his own family, plus another family who were entertaining them on that Halloween night. Christopher was found in his parked car, naked and covered in his victim's blood. Every single one of these convicted murderers, Carrington, Friedkin, Ullman, Stevens, Lester, denied any knowledge or involvement in the killings. As of today, it's currently unknown who lives at that address. In southern Siberia, tucked away in Russia's Buryatia Republic, lies the Kamar-Daban mountain range. It was there on August 5, 1993, that a group of Kazakhstani hikers stepped into a nightmare. They were led by Lyudmila Korovina, an incredibly experienced hiking instructor, and she'd been to Kamar-Daban before. With her were 6 of her students: Alexander Krysin, Tatiana Filipenko, Denis Shvachkin, Viktoria Zalesova, Timur Bapanov, and Valentina Utochenko, who would become the sole terrified survivor. On August 4th, as they began their descent from Retranslator Peak, an unexpected rainstorm hit. Korovina made the tough call to camp in an exposed area. They couldn't get a fire going that night because of the rain. It must have been miserable. The next morning, August 5th, they managed to make fire for breakfast, then pushed on. What happened next comes from Valentina Utochenko's chilling account. She says they were making their way down the mountain, around 7,800 feet up, when Satya Krysin, who was at the back of the group, suddenly let out a piercing scream. He was bleeding from his eyes and ears, frothing at the mouth, then fell to the ground convulsing before going completely still. Lyudmila Korovina rushed to him, trying to help, but just a moment later, she began showing the exact same horrifying symptoms. She convulsed and collapsed right on top of Sasha. Then, Tatiana Filipenko, who'd reached Korovina first, was next. She grabbed at her throat like she couldn't breathe, then stumbled to a nearby rock and began bashing her head against it until she went limp. Viktoria Zalesova and Timur Bapanov were terrified and tried to run. But as they ran, they collapsed too, throwing up blood and horrifyingly, clawing at their own throats, tearing off their clothes. Valentina and Denis Shvachkin hurried away, but a short distance later, Denis also collapsed, convulsing. Valya Utochenko, the sole witness to this nightmare, kept running down the mountain. She somehow managed to set up a tent under some trees for the night and fell into an exhausted sleep. The next day, she actually went back up to the horrifying scene to grab essential supplies from her friends' bodies. For 4 days, she hiked alone, following power lines, hoping someone would find her. Finally, on August 9th, a group of Ukrainian kayakers stumbled upon her, and they rushed her to the nearest police station. When the bodies were found, all the hikers were partially undressed, and every single one had signs of bruised lungs. The autopsies concluded that 5 of the 6 hikers, Satya, Tatiana, Timur, Victoria, and Denis, died of hypothermia, with protein deficiency listed as a contributing factor. Lyudmila Korovina, the experienced leader, was determined to have suffered a heart attack. But that official report immediately raised eyebrows. Rescuers on site, like Valery Tatarnikov and Vladimir Zinov, loudly declared it was impossible for them to have died from cold alone given the conditions. Lots of theories have been tossed around. Maybe altitude sickness, or a freak wave of infrasound. Super low-frequency sound waves that can alter the mind, leading to panic and psychosis. Some wonder if the hikers somehow stumbled upon a secret Russian military experiment, maybe a gas test, and they were silenced to keep it quiet. It's usually dismissed as unlikely for a public hiking area, but the symptoms described are chillingly similar to nerve agents, like Novichok, which was reportedly developed and tested in areas near Kamar-Daban around that time. Frothing at the mouth, convulsions, respiratory distress, even cardiac arrest, it all fits. Other ideas include contaminated water from nearby Lake Baikal, which has a history as a toxic waste dumping ground. Or even mushroom poisoning. Korovina was a known forager, and a bad batch of wild mushrooms could cause hallucinations, convulsions, and cardiac arrest, especially if they resembled edible ones. Despite all the speculation and the horrific eyewitness account, the Kamar-Daban incident remains officially unexplained. On the foothills around Salt Lake City, Utah, you'll find breathtaking views, winding trails, and plenty of fresh air. But since 2023, hikers and park rangers have been stumbling upon something else, something very out of place. Strange antennas bolted to remote, rocky peaks. Authorities have no idea what they're for, and more importantly, who put them there. As first reported by Salt Lake City TV network, KSL-TV5, these aren't government installations. They're surprisingly simple setups. Just a tall fiberglass antenna, typically a LoRa type, hooked up to a locked battery pack, all powered by a solar panel. They look almost homemade, yet professionally installed. Finding them is one thing, getting them down is another. Many of these mysterious towers have appeared on incredibly steep, hard-to-reach peaks. In one instance, removing just one antenna required a team of 5 people. Others have popped up on land managed by the University of Utah or even the Forest Service, a wide-ranging, unpermitted operation. There were no identifying marks whatsoever. These things were bolted right into the stone, needing special tools to detach. Salt Lake City public lands have managed to pull down about a dozen of these antennas so far. The biggest components found so far are a suitcase-sized, weatherproof case for the battery and router, weighing 50 or 60 pounds, plus 2 antennas, 4 to 6 feet tall, and a 3x4-foot solar panel. Getting this equipment to over 7,000 feet high is a pretty tough thing to do by yourself. It was initially thought that maybe they were cell phone boosters. Another theory points to cryptocurrency mining. To this day, it's still a mystery. Who is installing them and what they are exactly used for is unsolved. Our first photo takes us to the night of June 3rd, 1991, somewhere between 9:30 and 11 at night. A man walked into the Super 8 motel off a quiet stretch of road in Albuquerque, New Mexico. He said that he was a local truck driver and gave his name as Eduardo Collin. He paid cash for a one-night stay, with 2 guests. He signed the motel register with mostly accurate info, except for the license plate number. That was a fake. Then he was given the keys to room 233. By 11 o'clock the next morning, Eduardo was supposed to check out, but he didn't. 2 days passed before on June 5th, a motel security guard knocked on the door. There was no answer, and the door was locked from the inside. He forced it open with a screwdriver. When he entered the room, it was eerily quiet. Something felt off. The bed was untouched. Empty bottles of alcohol were on the table, and in the middle of the bottles sat a digital scale with the name George Martinez written on it in marker. Then the guard opened the bathroom door. There, hanging from the shower rod by a suitcase strap, was the body of a woman. She had likely been dead since the night Eduardo checked in. Also found in the room was a photograph. It was grainy and low-res, something you'd see from a mall photo booth. The photo showed the woman smiling beside a man. Motel staff were sure it was Eduardo, but the photo didn't tell the truth. It would take years to track down Eduardo's family. By the time investigators found them, Eduardo had already died of natural causes. When they showed his relatives the photo, the answer was chilling. That wasn't Eduardo. And they had no idea who the woman was. For decades, the woman remained nameless, unidentified. Then in March 2021, a lead surfaced. Someone claimed her name might have been Becca, a young woman from LA County, maybe Reseda or Silmar. She may have flown into Albuquerque from Los Angeles or Burbank, but no last name and no solid ID. The Albuquerque Jane Doe had curly strawberry blonde hair. She had either hazel or gray eyes and was possibly of Hispanic heritage. Toxicology later revealed illegal substances in her system at the time of her death. She was wearing multicolored bikini-style underwear, size 6, men's. She had on a Trends brand tank top, white Guess denim slacks with zippers at the ankles, 3 white metal earrings, and a thick silver and gold bracelet. She carried a brown suitcase full of women's clothes, and she had a dark suede purse and a patterned pocketbook. Inside was $500 in cash. And that photo, the only image that might show her face, believed to be captured just hours before she died. No ID, no confirmed name, just a haunting story in room 233. It was supposed to be his first real adventure. On July 18, 1991, 12-year-old Jared Michael Negrete set out on a Boy Scouts backpacking trip into Southern California's San Bernardino Mountains. It was his first time spending a night outdoors, first time carrying everything he needed on his back. The plan was to summit Mount San Gorgonio, Southern California's tallest peak. But Jared, still new to the physical demands of high-altitude hiking, struggled to keep up. As the group moved ahead, the scout leaders made the decision that they'd continue toward the summit and Jared would catch up, except he didn't. Other hikers on the trail would later recall seeing a boy matching Jared's description. He was cutting through trails, likely trying to shorten the path, something dangerous, especially on those steep, unstable slopes. One man, a firefighter from Santa Ana, saw him around 6 p.m. and warned him not to stray from the trail. That was the last time anyone saw Jared alive. By nightfall, the scout leader had hiked 12 miles in the dark to report Jared missing. At 7 the next morning, the search began. Helicopters hovered low, rescue teams combed the forest on foot, and bloodhounds were brought in. For days they searched. Then on July 21st, they found a set of small footprints at the 10,000-foot level, likely Jared's. The terrain was brutal. Loose rock, steep drop-offs, dense brush. One slip, one wrong step, and you could disappear. Basically, a good rule of thumb is that if you stay on the trail, you're fine. But the moment you stray, you're in danger. It's really that simple. 4 days later, the firefighter who last saw Jared led rescuers back to the spot on Vivian Creek Trail where he'd spoken with him. Then came the eerie discovery, on July 27th. Nearly 2 weeks after Jared disappeared, searchers found a Kodak disposable camera, 45 feet off the trail. It had 12 pictures on it. Most were scenic shots of the mountains and valleys, taken before he got lost. But the final photo was different. It was a close-up of Jared's face. Or part of it, just his eyes and nose captured by flash in the dark. As if he were trying to document something, or maybe leave a trace behind. Near the camera, they found a backpack, candy wrappers, and beef jerky. But no Jared. After 16 relentless days, the official search was called off on August 4th. The chance of survival by then, authorities said, was almost nil. Jared's family held a memorial service on September 7th in Hacienda Heights. Over 500 people came to mourn a boy who left for the mountains with excitement and wonder, and never came home. His story remains one of the most haunting cold cases in California wilderness history. Just a couple months ago, a Reddit user shared a story shortly after his uncle passed away. There wasn't much to inherit, just a small overgrown lot with a weathered old shed. The property was left to the user's dad. No house, no valuables. Just that sliver of land and the shed. It was only when they finally opened the shed that things took a strange turn. Inside, gathering dust on a warped wooden shelf, was a DVD case for Night of the Living Dead. But there was no disc inside. Instead, they found 2 items, a photograph and a torn scrap of paper covered in strange, deliberate markings, symbols that almost look like runes. The photo showed a quiet corner of London, St. James's Park, facing the Solemn Guards Memorial. Reddit users quickly mobilized, digging into every detail. The symbols, at first undecipherable, were cracked by a few sharp-eyed community members. The message hidden in the strange script read, "She would never understand our relationship was only that of work. I have watched the result of our time. He still has time until 30. It read like a confession. Or a warning. Maybe both. Speculation exploded on Reddit, but as quickly as the post surfaced, it went cold. No follow-ups, no new leads. All that remains is a decoded message, a photo, and a DVD case. It was just before midnight on June 8, 1988, when 22-year-old Matt Chase pulled up outside his Los Angeles home with his roommate, Teresa Dahl. They'd just finished dinner. Nothing out of the ordinary, just another quiet night. But before they called it, Matt remembered. He still had to deposit his paycheck. Teresa tossed him the keys to her car, a red 1983 Volkswagen GTI. She asked if he could grab some cat food on the way back. Matt left with just his bank card. No wallet, no ID. It was a short trip. The bank was only 2 blocks away. 10, maybe 15 minutes round trip. But Matt never came back. And by morning, Teresa and her brother Steve, both childhood friends of Matt, knew something was wrong. They called the Los Angeles Police Department, then took matters into their own hands. Steve phoned the bank, posing as Matt. Using his social security number, he got through. They were able to get the information that changed everything, that the card had been used multiple times. With this new information, Detective Scott Burkhart took the case, and from the start, he had a gut feeling that something about it felt different. It felt wrong. When investigators pulled Matt's bank records, a chilling timeline began to form. Matt made it to the ATM that night. He deposited his paycheck and took out some cash. Then he came back again, just 30 minutes later, and tried to withdraw $280. A strange move. There were more attempts later that night. $200 declined. Then an attempt for $100, but it was declined again. 11 minutes later, someone tried again from another branch across town. This time, there was a surveillance camera. The footage showed Matt and someone else standing too close. A man, stockier, shorter, looming over his shoulder almost like he was forcing the transaction. No one lets a stranger stand that close at an ATM. Over the next 36 hours, Matt's bank card was used 5 more times. When the paycheck finally cleared, $400 was withdrawn. Then the card was confiscated by the machine, frozen by Steve and Teresa in a last-ditch effort to find out what was going on. The card was dusted for prints, but nothing was found. Police said it was either wiped clean or the man in the photo wore gloves. Matt's parents came down from Oregon. They spent nights combing LA's streets, convinced they'd spot the car. Then, on June 27th, almost 3 weeks after he vanished, Matt's car was found, abandoned, not far from where he'd last been seen. Inside was one clue: a blue bandana. It didn't belong to Matt. It didn't belong to Teresa. Police believed it belonged to whoever had taken him. The car was spotless, no prints, nothing to work with. For a while, theories swirled, but deep down everyone feared the worst, and the worst was confirmed 3 months later. On September 17, 1988, Matt's remains were discovered in a ravine near Pasadena. He had been shot, likely dead since the week he disappeared. Matt Chase had been murdered, and the case was classified as a robbery/homicide. His father, Frank, never stopped chasing answers. He kept his own notes, worked his own angles. When he died in 2007, his daughter Christina picked up the torch, and finally, in 2018, police gave her a name. David Bear Meza, 20 years old, a suspected gang member. He was the man in the ATM photo, identified by his own girlfriend. Circumstantial evidence sealed it. Ironically, Meza had been gunned down in a drive-by shooting just 2 days after Matt disappeared. June 10, 1988. A corner in LA's violent Rampart district. It's believed Meza robbed Matt, forced him into the car, and took his life. Whether he acted alone is still unknown, but police consider the case closed. For Teresa and Christina, there's no closure. Only the silence left behind by a single late-night errand that turned into a nightmare. Our final photo of this episode is another one that comes from Reddit. About 7 months ago, a Reddit user shared a story that sent chills through the true crime community. He'd been browsing a local thrift store, just killing time, when he came across an old Kodak carousel slide box, sitting among the dusty shelves. Inside were vintage photos. Most were forgettable, but one stood out. When he saw it, he froze. Unfortunately, we can't show the photo on YouTube, but a link to the Reddit post will be in the description so you can check it out for yourselves. It shows a man, naked, lying on the floor between a bed and a wall. The bed, the wall, and the man are all covered in blood. What he saw disturbed him so deeply that he immediately called the non-emergency police line. The man told the dispatcher what he found, that it looked real, and that it didn't feel like a prank or a prop. They told him to stay put. An officer would be dispatched to meet him. When the officer arrived, they studied the photo together. The officer didn't dismiss it. He asked to see exactly where the man found it. Then he took down his information, bagged the photo, and said it would be sent off for processing and investigation. Before he left, the officer was honest. It might be a dead end. The photo had no known origin, no name, no context. Just a single disturbing image dropped in a box of forgotten memories, donated anonymously. The Reddit user ended the post by saying it was the last he heard about it. No calls, no follow-ups, no headlines, just silence. And to this day, 7 months later, whatever was in that photo remains a mystery. Imagine walking through your home when suddenly the hallway stretches like taffy. The doorframe is now towering above you like the gate to a castle. Your own hands look weird. They either swell to cartoonish proportions or shrink down, like seeing them through the wrong end of a telescope. Maybe the strangest thing about this whole experience is finding out that the world around you hasn't changed. And this isn't a dream. It's not drugs. And it's not a hallucination. at least not in the traditional sense. This is Alice in Wonderland syndrome, a rare neurological condition that makes reality itself feel wrong in every way. Named after Lewis Carroll's fantastical tale, the syndrome distorts perception in ways that seem plucked from fiction. Objects look enormous or impossibly small. Time seems to speed up or drag endlessly. Sounds shift, either muffled and distant or so loud they rattle in your skull. Even your sense of touch can betray you, making a nearby surface feel miles away or impossibly close. Episodes come on fast without warning. They can last minutes or stretch toward an hour. Then, just as suddenly, the spell breaks, and the world snaps back to normal, as if nothing ever happened. But for the person who experienced it, the memory of it sticks with them. They have a hard time telling if what they experienced was real or not. Most of the time, Alice in Wonderland syndrome isn't caused by a psychiatric condition. Instead, it's often linked to migraines, especially in children and teens. Some report these strange distortions right before the pain hits, but others experience them without any headache at all. The syndrome has also been associated with temporal lobe epilepsy, mononucleosis caused by the Epstein-Barr virus, brain lesions, and from certain prescription medications. In many cases, doctors are left with no clear answer. There's no cure for the syndrome itself, but treating the root cause can reduce the episodes. For those who've experienced it, Alice in Wonderland syndrome is an unforgettable and at times horrifying trip down their very own rabbit hole. Picture this. You're drifting off. The world is quiet. You're sinking deeper into sleep. Then, you feel like an explosion just tore through your skull. It was a blast of sound so loud and violent that it jolted you to sit upright in bed, heart racing and ears ringing. But there's nothing. No fire, no flash, no noise, just silence. Sometimes, it's more than just sound. People report seeing flashes of light or feeling a jolt of electricity ripple through their bodies, like they were hit by an invisible electric current. Most episodes happen during hypnagogia, that strange state when you're not quite asleep, not quite awake. It's a liminal zone where your brain starts to shut down, but sometimes that process goes wrong. The leading theory is that when your brain prepares for sleep, it normally powers down your senses piece by piece. But with exploding head syndrome, it misfires. The auditory system, particularly in the brainstem, lights up in a chaotic surge of activity. Your brain doesn't know what to make of it, so it interprets the burst as sound. It can happen once, or it can happen in clusters. Most people never talk about it. Because let's be honest, telling someone you thought your head exploded in the middle of the night isn't exactly breakfast conversation. And yet, it's more common than you'd think. It's not dangerous. It doesn't mean you're broken. It's just further proof of the incredible power of the mind. That even in our most vulnerable, quietest moments, the brain is still capable of making noise loud enough to shake the soul. Nodding syndrome starts with a bright-eyed, playful child. Then one day, they start to nod. Not out of sleepiness or boredom, but involuntarily. At first, it looks relatively innocent, almost like a tic. But then it just doesn't stop. Instead, the nodding grows stronger, more frequent. Then come the seizures, the vacant stares, the silence. The body begins to deteriorate. This is nodding syndrome, a cruel and unexplained neurological illness that has ravaged thousands of children across remote regions of Uganda, South Sudan, and Tanzania. And no one knows why. In these quiet rural villages, families have been forced to watch their children metaphorically disappear in front of their eyes, physically present, but mentally slipping away. Some can no longer speak, others can't feed themselves, and some simply wander into danger, unable to recognize it any longer. For years, the world's top scientists have chased answers. What they've found is both promising and maddening. The leading theory points to a tiny parasitic worm, Onchocerca volvulus, the same organism responsible for river blindness. It's spread through the bites of black flies, which swarm around fast-moving rivers in these regions. Here's the catch. The parasite itself doesn't invade the brain. Instead, researchers believe that as the immune system tries to fight the worm, it misfires. It begins attacking the brain, mistaking certain healthy cells for the enemy. The result is a devastating cascade that affects cognition, motor function, and personality. turning children into shadows of themselves. But even that answer is incomplete. Not every child infected with the worm develops nodding syndrome. And not every child with nodding syndrome carries the parasite. It's a maddening contradiction. Scientists have ruled out toxins, food, fungal infections. Nothing sticks. The parasite theory is the strongest lead, but it's not the whole story. Meanwhile, the suffering continues. It's not just a health crisis, it's a humanitarian one. And somewhere, in the heart of Africa, nodding syndrome still claims its victims, quietly, relentlessly, while the world continues to look for answers. Think about something that your body needs to survive. We all know we need food and water, but maybe just as important is sleep. For some, the ability to sleep goes away completely. Not a bout of insomnia, not a sleepless night. This is something far darker. A condition so rare and cruel it sounds like it's fake, but it's very real. This is fatal insomnia syndrome, a degenerative brain disease that robs people of the ability to sleep until they die. There are two versions of this nightmare condition: fatal familial insomnia, or FFI, which is passed down genetically. The other is sporadic fatal insomnia, or SFI, which strikes randomly, without warning or family history. It begins slowly. A few restless nights here and there. Light sleep. Trouble staying asleep. You tell yourself it's stress. Maybe work. Maybe age. But it doesn't stop. Then come the panic attacks, hallucinations, paranoia, profuse sweating, dilated pupils, slurred speech. Your brain starts breaking down, not just from exhaustion, but from the disease itself. You lose weight. Your balance collapses. You can't walk straight. You can't think. You exist in a waking hell, where the line between dream and reality is permanently severed. Then the final stage is total insomnia. No sleep. At all. Ever again. You are officially trapped, awake, disoriented, fading, while your body disintegrates from the inside out. Dementia takes over. After that is coma, and eventually, death. Fatal insomnia is part of the prion disease family, like mad cow, but far more intimate, personal, and devastating. The villains here are rogue prions, normal proteins in the brain that have folded into the wrong shape. Once that happens, they infect others, like a biological chain reaction. These twisted proteins cluster, destroying brain cells, targeting the thalamus, the brain's sleep switchboard. Under the microscope, the damage looks like holes burned into the brain, a space left where neurons once lived. There is no cure, no treatment, no way to stop it once it begins. Doctors can only manage the symptoms, keep patients comfortable as their bodies shut down. On average, death comes within 7 to 36 months of the first signs. A rare and relentless erosion of consciousness, a death without rest, a fate that strips away the most essential human comfort, the ability to close your eyes and leave the world behind, if only for a while. Have you ever stood on a cliff's edge, looked down into the abyss, and felt that flicker, that split-second impulse, that whisper in your mind that says, jump? Not because you want to die, not because you're in danger, but because for one unexplainable moment, your brain suggests the most reckless thing imaginable. What if you just let go? This strange, involuntary thought has a name: the call of the void. Or, as the French more poetically call it, l'appel du vide. It's not a mental breakdown. In fact, it's something far more universal and deeply human. You're driving down the highway. Everything is calm. Then, out of nowhere, your brain flashes a horrifying idea. What if you swerved into traffic? You're on a rooftop. You feel safe. But suddenly your mind conjures a mental image of falling. It's jarring. It's irrational. And yet, it happens. So what is this strange phenomenon? Psychologists believe the call of the void is your brain's way of reaffirming your will to live. That sudden, absurd impulse is actually a reverse safety mechanism. When you encounter a dangerous situation, your subconscious lights up with the possibility of death. Not to tempt you, but to remind you of what's at stake. Your brain is running a systems check. You see the edge. You feel the risk. You choose not to jump. Check complete. It's a survival prompt dressed as the Grim Reaper. Others believe it falls under the category of intrusive thoughts, those random, often nonsensical ideas that pop into our heads uninvited. Most are harmless, weird, sometimes dark, but not dangerous in themselves. And we all have them. The call of the void just happens to be one of the more intense varieties. And because it happens in moments of potential danger, it sticks with us. It rattles around in our memory. We don't like to admit we thought it, but we did. The real twist? It's normal. More common than most people realize. We just don't talk about it. Because how do you explain something like that without sounding unwell? But it's not a sign of a death wish. It's a bizarre celebration of life. It means you're still choosing to live. So the next time you're at the edge of a cliff, or behind the wheel, or beside the train tracks, know this. If this happens, it's not the void calling you. It's your brain making sure you're still choosing not to die. Deep inside the Amazon jungle, there's an amazing, little-known natural phenomenon. It's a geological wonder, a river that literally boils. At its source, the river starts as a stream that winds through the quiet, unassuming jungle. The water is pristine, crystal clear, and a very comfortable 80 degrees Fahrenheit. Surprisingly cool compared to the rainforest's relentless heat and humidity. But as this river snakes downstream, something truly strange begins to happen. Over the course of nearly 4 miles, this stream transforms into a river that reaches an average of over 200 degrees Fahrenheit at its hottest point. Hot enough to cause serious burns, even death. This isn't an ordinary stream. This is a river of steam, a natural cauldron of boiling water cutting right through the jungle. And it's deep, up to 15 feet in some spots, and stretching up to 100 feet across. The local people, the Ashaninka, have their own name for it, Shanai Timpishka, which translates to boiled by the heat of the sun. But they know better. This isn't the sun's doing. To them, this is the work of Yakumama, the mother of the waters, a mythical serpent spirit said to live in the river's depths. For the Ashaninka, the boiling river is a living being, a sacred force, ancient and wise. And for centuries, that belief was enough. But for modern science, Shanai Timpishka is a profound riddle. There are no magma chambers nearby, no lava flows, no smoking crater to explain the incredible heat. The leading scientific theory is that rainwater in the region slowly soaks deep underground through ancient geological faults. As it plunges into the Earth's crust, it gets superheated by the planet's own internal warmth. Then, through a maze of natural channels, this now scorching hot water is pushed back to the surface, pouring directly into the riverbed. But Shanai Timpishka is more than just a scientific oddity. It's a living laboratory, a rare ecosystem where life has somehow adapted to survive in this near-boiling water. In an era of rising global temperatures, this river offers something few places on Earth can: a glimpse of our future, a world where heat reshapes life itself. Bada Valley is located inside Lor Lindu National Park in central Sulawesi, Indonesia, and there are few places in the world like it. Scattered all over the landscape are hundreds of massive stone figures. These are the Bada Valley megaliths. They're carved out of solid rock. They're raw, primal, and mesmerizing to look at. Some seem calm, almost peaceful. Others could be considered unsettling. Approximately 30 of them have human-like faces, eyes frozen wide, gazing outward. No one really knows much about them, even now. The first official discovery was in 1908. Some archaeologists think they might be over 5,000 years old, with some dating back to the 14th century. Others argue they were carved around 1,000 years ago. Local legends are what truly breathe life into this stone. In the nearby villages, you'll hear names whispered with both reverence and fear. Tokala'ia, they say, was a violent man, turned to stone as punishment. Those deep grooves you see on his figure are supposedly knife wounds. Then there's Tadolako, who was a protector until he stole some rice. His betrayal, they say, sealed his fate, turned to stone right where he stood. These stories might not be history as we know it, but they're incredibly meaningful. They carry memories, lessons, and myths. They tell us these statues were more than just markers. They were sacred objects belonging to a civilization from long ago. Maybe they were guardians, or even warnings. And then there are the darker ideas. Some believe the megaliths were connected to human sacrifice. Others think they were talismans, put there to keep evil spirits away. Another huge part of the mystery: the stone they used isn't even from the valley where they were found. Instead, it was quarried and brought in from elsewhere. This means that whoever made these figures had to organize labor, logistics, and ceremonies on a massive scale. And this was a time before wheels, before maps, and even before they had metal tools. Their design is simple. Huge heads, empty eye sockets, no legs. Sometimes just a single line swooping down the face, marking a cheek or chin. Some figures are genderless, others are clearly male, with some parts carved, right there prominently shown. But the Bada Valley holds more than just statues. Scattered around, you'll also find these strange circular stone basins called kalambas. They're huge, hollowed-out tanks carved from single massive boulders. Some have holes in the middle, others are split into two sections. For years, locals figured they were royal bathtubs, built for kings. But then they found discarded stone lids nearby, and those tell a different story. These weren't for bathing. Maybe they were coffins, maybe water cisterns, or something totally different. Nobody really knows for sure. What we do know is this: whoever carved these incredible megaliths and kalambas was organized. They had a vision, and they were deeply spiritual. They understood stone. They understood storytelling. And they definitely understood permanence. For centuries, there have been whispers through the dense, uncharted rainforests of Honduras. Tales of an ancient metropolis, a legendary white city, La Ciudad Blanca. Some called it the lost city of the monkey god, a place of immense wealth and untold secrets, swallowed whole by the jungle. For generations, it was dismissed as myth, a fever dream born of tropical heat and colonial greed. The legend spoke of sprawling ruins, glittering gold, and a civilization that vanished, seemingly overnight. Explorers, treasure hunters, and adventurers have spent decades, even centuries, trying to find it, battling the unforgiving terrain, deadly snakes, and disease. Many tried, many failed, some never returned. Then, in 2012, something extraordinary happened. Using cutting-edge technology called LiDAR, basically light detection and ranging, a plane flew over the remote, unexplored Mosquitia region of eastern Honduras. This isn't just regular aerial photography. LiDAR penetrates the thick jungle, bouncing laser pulses off the ground below, effectively stripping away the vegetation to reveal what lies hidden beneath. And what it revealed was astonishing. Beneath the dense growth, LiDAR unveiled not just a few scattered ruins, but the clear outlines of an extensive ancient city. Structures, plazas, and even a complex irrigation system. This wasn't just a village, it was a major urban center, and it looked like it could finally be La Ciudad Blanca. In 2015, a team of archaeologists led by National Geographic began hacking through miles of untouched jungle until they finally reached the coordinates. When they got there it was, the unmistakable ruins. They uncovered earth mounds that were once towering structures and a vast collection of stone artifacts. Among these artifacts were dozens of beautifully carved stone objects, some depicting jaguars and a strange, part human, part animal figure, reinforcing the monkey god aspect of the legend. These aren't just decorative pieces, they're ritual objects, left exactly where their creators abandoned them. It was like the inhabitants had simply walked away, leaving everything behind. Researchers believe the city was likely inhabited between 1000 and 1400 AD, flourishing just before the arrival of Europeans. Today, La Ciudad Blanca remains largely unexcavated, a vast archaeological site still mostly hidden beneath the jungle. Deep in the heart of the Peruvian Amazon, within the protected lands of the Madre de Dios region, lies the ancestral territory of the Harakbut people. For generations, they have lived in harmony with this immense, untamed wilderness, their lives intertwined with nature. But even they were unprepared for what was revealed in 2014, a discovery that blurred the lines between geology, history, and the truly inexplicable. Harakbut park rangers navigating the dense, unforgiving terrain stumbled upon something extraordinary. High on a remote cliff face, partially obscured by the thick jungle, was an unmistakable image. It was a giant face, carved into the very rock itself. This wasn't some small eroded feature. It was massive and distinct, with clear eyes, a nose, and a mouth. It was gigantic, its features surprisingly human-like, yet weathered by countless centuries. The Rangers immediately knew they had found something profoundly significant. The real question comes down to this. What is it? Is it a trick of nature? A coincidental rock formation shaped by wind and rain over millennia? Or is it the work of an unknown ancient civilization, a monumental carving left behind by a people we know nothing about? If it truly is man-made, then who created it? And how did they manage such a colossal feat in such an incredibly remote and challenging location? For the Harikbut people, this discovery resonates deeply with their own oral traditions. Their elders speak of sacred sites, of ancient beings, and of the profound connection between their ancestors and the land. The face immediately became a powerful symbol, a tangible link to their past, reinforcing their spiritual ties to their territory and strengthening their fight to protect it. Scientists and geologists who have seen images of the face are divided. Some argue that while striking, it could indeed be a natural formation. Others point to the remarkable symmetry and distinct features, which some suggest is a sign there was an intelligence behind its creation. The face remains largely unstudied, a colossal mystery staring out from the depths of the Amazon. For centuries, we imagined the Amazon rainforest as a pristine, untouched wilderness. But what if parts of it were, in fact, an ancient landscape fundamentally reshaped by human hands, only to be swallowed whole by time and trees? Deep in the western Amazon, a truly amazing discovery has forced us to completely rethink the past of this incredible region, the mysterious Amazonian squares. As parts of the Amazon were cleared for farming and ranching, particularly in the Brazilian state of Acre and extending into Bolivia, strange patterns began to emerge. From above, what looked like perfect geometric shapes, squares, circles, rectangles, and complex interlocking designs, became visible etched into the earth. These weren't natural formations. They were clearly man-made. These weren't just a few isolated mounds. They were hundreds of monumental earthworks, geometric enclosures sometimes measuring hundreds of meters across, connected by perfectly straight roads and ditches that stretch for miles. Some of these geometric patterns were incredibly precise, appearing as if laid out with a giant compass and straight edge. This wasn't the work of simple tribal villages. This was the sign of a sophisticated, large-scale society. They're not like the Nazca lines, meant to be seen only from above, from the air. These were built on the forest floor, seemingly for ground-level use. The big mystery was who built them, why, and how did a civilization manage to thrive in such a challenging environment without leaving behind massive amounts of typical archaeological artifacts? Research suggests these geoglyphs were constructed between roughly 1200 and 1500 AD, just before the arrival of Europeans in South America. The time frame is crucial because it challenges the long-held belief that the Amazon could only support small, scattered populations. The Amazonian squares point to a much larger, more organized, and technologically advanced pre-Columbian civilization than we ever thought possible. The working theory now is that these structures likely served multiple purposes: defensive enclosures, places for communal gatherings, perhaps even agricultural systems designed to manage water or cultivate specific crops in a sustainable way. The connecting roads suggest a network, indicating trade and communication between different communities. This was a complex society that literally re-engineered parts of the Amazon.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Fireside Unsolved. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe to help the channel grow. Until next time, take it easy and be easy, you filthy bastards.